You were never supposed to hear this. What I'm about to tell you was whispered only in shadows, passed through trembling lips of those who understood that speaking it aloud meant death. Imagine standing in the cold marble corridors of Topkapi Palace in the 1600s. It's the dead of night. The torches flicker. The Bosphorus tide crashes against stone walls. And then, you hear the muffled screams, carried inside a heavy, writhing sack. A woman, dragged by the Sultan's gardeners toward the black waters. Her crime? Not treason. Not murder. Not theft. She spoke too freely. She saw something she wasn't meant to see. And now the sea itself will silence her forever. This was the reality of the Sultan's harem, the most feared household on earth. A prison of silk and jewels where beauty could elevate you to unimaginable power, or condemn you to a death so cruel it was never recorded in official history. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire ruled 3 continents. Armies, governors, and ministers bowed to the Sultan. Yet behind the palace's gilded walls, a darker empire thrived. A secret dominion ruled not by soldiers, but by whispers, by eyes that watched from every shadow, and by punishments designed to erase not just a body, but a soul. You've been told history is about kings, battles, treaties. That is the surface. What they don't want you to see is how empires truly held power. Not with swords, but with fear. Fear that seeped into the bones of every concubine, every eunuch, every servant who walked the harem's endless corridors. A fear that made silence more valuable than gold, and obedience the only currency of survival. But here's the truth no history book dares to tell you: these punishments were not random. They were not merely acts of cruelty. They were systems of control. Designed with precision, cultivated with care, and refined over centuries to ensure that resistance never survived, that no rebellion could spark in the hearts of the women who were both ornaments and prisoners of the Sultan's pleasure. Tonight, I'm not here to entertain you with stories of the past. I am here to hand you a key to a locked chamber of history, a chamber soaked in blood and whispers. And once you step inside, you will never look at power, control, or silence the same way again. The most terrifying figure in the Sultan's harem was not the Sultan himself. It was the man who could never touch a woman, yet decided who lived and who vanished into the Bosphorus. His title was Kisler Aga, the chief black eunuch. To outsiders, he was a servant. In truth, he was the executioner of dreams, the gatekeeper of terror, the hand that crushed disobedience before it could take shape. His eyes were everywhere. His spies were invisible. Mothers reported on daughters. Sisters betrayed sisters. A careless whisper could become your death sentence before sunrise. The Kisler Aga had perfected what today we'd call psychological warfare, but he didn't need armies, weapons, or chains. He ruled with uncertainty. You never knew which rule mattered, which glance was forbidden, which word would be punished. That uncertainty kept every woman in a constant state of fear, paralyzed, unable to trust anyone, even themselves. Think about the brilliance of that design. If you are never sure what will get you killed, you will police yourself harder than any guard could. This is how real control works. It doesn't need visible whips. It burrows into the mind, until fear itself becomes the prison. Punishments weren't just acts of cruelty, they were spectacles. Women were forced to watch as others were sewn into sacks, strangled with silk cords, or starved in hidden chambers. They were made to see what awaited them if they strayed from obedience. These punishments weren't only about ending one life, they were about controlling 100 others. Terror multiplied in silence. The Kisler Aga's chambers were placed strategically within the palace, with secret passageways that allowed him to appear without warning. Imagine living under that, knowing at any hour, day or night, he could emerge from a shadow and decide your fate. Power like that doesn't just enforce order, it rewrites the soul of everyone under it. But here's what they won't tell you: this system wasn't unique to the Ottomans. It was a mirror of how all empires rule, in every age. They don't govern through freedom. They govern through fear, surveillance, and punishment. The harem was a microcosm of the empire itself, a cage of velvet and blood. And those who survived learned a brutal truth: obedience buys time, but never safety. Inside the Sultan's harem, love was not love. Friendship was not friendship. Every bond could be twisted, every embrace poisoned. The empire's brilliance lay not only in its armies, but in how it weaponized intimacy itself. Imagine two young women entering the harem together, perhaps captured in war, perhaps sold by desperate families, perhaps gifted by foreign rulers. They cling to each other for comfort, believing their bond will help them survive. But soon, the whispers begin. A eunuch offers one of them a taste of luxury, an extra portion of food, a softer bed, a jewel. The price? Information. What does your friend say when the guards are gone? Has she ever spoken of escape? Of the Sultan's secrets? Of dissatisfaction? This is how loyalty was broken. Sisters, daughters, even mothers were pulled into this game of betrayal. Every woman was both prisoner and spy, both victim and weapon. In this system, trust became the most dangerous act of all. You could love, but you could never fully believe. You could laugh, but you never knew if your laughter would be repeated to the wrong ears. And here lies the genius of psychological domination: you don't need chains when you can make someone doubt the people they love. You don't need guards when your prisoners are guarding each other, destroying each other, for scraps of privilege. Think of the silence this created. Hundreds of women living under the same roof, breathing the same air, yet each one trapped in a fortress of isolation. You could be surrounded by voices and yet utterly alone, because you never knew who would sell you out to the chief eunuch. And when betrayal was discovered, the punishment wasn't only death, it was public humiliation. A woman accused of disloyalty might be paraded through the palace in chains before being executed. The message was clear: intimacy is dangerous, love is fatal, loyalty is suicide. Understand this: the Ottomans did not merely rule bodies. They ruled minds. They turned natural human instincts, love, trust, friendship, into tools of destruction. That is the darkest kind of power. Not the sword that cuts flesh, but the whisper that poisons souls. And here's where you, watching this right now, must realize something: what happened in those chambers isn't buried in history. It is the same pattern used today in governments, corporations, and institutions. Divide. Distrust. Control. They don't fear rebellion when they can make you fight each other instead. There are many ways to end a life. But the Ottomans understood something deeper: death alone does not terrify. What terrifies is the performance of death, the ritual of punishment designed to linger in the minds of every witness. In the harem, execution was not the end. It was theater. A stage upon which fear was etched into memory. One of the most infamous punishments was the sack of silence. A woman who disobeyed, whether by gossip, disloyalty, or even a glance that threatened palace order, was sewn alive into a heavy sack. No trial, no farewell. Just her body folded into suffocating darkness as eunuchs carried her to the Bosphorus. Her last breath was not on land, but underwater, swallowed by the black tide. For the other women forced to watch her carried away, the message was clear: speak too freely, and you will vanish into nothingness. Not even a grave would remain. But drowning was not the only fate. Strangulation with a silk cord was another common punishment. Why silk? Because it left no visible mark. It was elegance turned into a weapon, luxury becoming the instrument of death. To die by silk was to die unseen, erased clean, as if the empire itself demanded silence even in execution. Then there were the punishments of slow erasure. A woman could be locked in an isolated chamber, denied food and light until her body wasted into shadow. Others were beaten not for their crimes, but for their usefulness, to be broken yet kept alive, serving as a living warning of what resistance looked like. Pain became a language. Suffering became a script. And every woman in the harem learned to read it fluently. But the cruelest punishments were not always physical. Sometimes, they were psychological games meant to unravel the soul. A favorite concubine might suddenly be ignored, her privileges stripped, her beauty rendered meaningless. Isolation, neglect, silence, until she began to doubt her worth, her mind collapsing inward. That kind of punishment left no blood on the floor, yet destroyed more completely than a blade ever could. Understand this, these were not random acts of brutality. They were calculated demonstrations of power. By blending elegance with horror, beauty with death, the Ottomans forged a system that ruled through fear more absolute than chains could ever provide. The harem was not simply a prison, it was a crucible of terror, where the human spirit itself was tested, broken, and reshaped into silence. And yet, in this darkness, a new form of power was also born. Not from swords or silk, but from the women who learned to play the system itself. What happens when you lock hundreds of ambitious, intelligent, desperate women into a palace ruled by silence and blood? Most were broken. But a few learned to survive. And survival in the harem was never passive. It demanded cunning, manipulation, and a cold mastery of human nature. Some women studied the rhythms of punishment like others study scripture. They learned which eunuchs could be bribed, which guards could be seduced with promises, which rival concubines could be turned into pawns. They understood that the chief eunuch might hold the keys, but information was the true currency of life and death. Consider this, in a system built on betrayal, the sharpest minds discovered how to weaponize betrayal for themselves. They whispered lies that destroyed rivals. They staged conflicts to direct suspicion away from their own secrets. Some even manipulated the Sultan's emotions, turning his gaze against those who threatened their position. In a place where a single rumor could kill, controlling the narrative became the deadliest weapon of all. Out of this crucible of terror emerged women who rose from slaves to rulers. Figures like Sultan, once a concubine, who wielded more political power than most ministers of the empire. She learned the language of silence, the art of timing, and the psychology of control, skills forged in the same system that crushed so many others. Do you see the pattern? Where most broke, a rare few transformed. The harem was both a prison and a school of power. Those who survived its punishments didn't just endure, they evolved into predators cloaked in silk, queens hidden behind veils. And here's where you, listening right now, must make a choice. When you face systems designed to break you, whether in politics, business, or even your personal life, you either collapse under their weight, or you learn to use their own weapons against them. Survival demands transformation. Obedience makes you invisible. Strategy makes you untouchable. If you've followed me this far, you're not here for entertainment. You're here for awakening. So pause for a moment. In the comments, write this phrase twice to lock it into your identity. From silence, I rise. That phrase is more than words. It's a declaration. A reminder that even in systems built on fear, there is always a path to power, for the one willing to see what others cannot. The harem was not an isolated chamber of cruelty. It was a model. A microcosm of how empires control their people. What happened to the women behind the gilded walls was only a concentrated form of what was happening across 3 continents. The punishments of the harem were reflections of punishments in the empire itself. The Sultan's ministers, governors, and soldiers all understood the same truth: fear is the most efficient weapon of rule. Just as concubines learned to silence themselves, entire provinces learned to bow before the empire without resistance. The sack in the Bosphorus had its echo in villages where rebels vanished overnight. The silk cord had its counterpart in secret executions of generals who grew too ambitious. Surveillance wasn't confined to palace corridors, it spread through the empire's veins. Spies reported on governors. Governors reported on soldiers. Soldiers reported on citizens. In every layer of society, someone was always watching, always listening, always ready to trade information for privilege or survival. Just as women in the harem betrayed their closest companions, subjects of the empire were pushed to betray neighbors, friends, even family. The system thrived on suspicion. And what about spectacle? The same logic applied. Public executions in city squares, the display of severed heads on pikes, the ritual of showing punishment as theater, these were the empire's way of ensuring obedience through terror. Just as women were forced to watch their companions sewn into sacks, the empire's citizens were forced to witness the fate of anyone who dared to resist. Understand this: what you see in the harem is the anatomy of control itself. Strip away the silk, and you see the same skeleton of domination repeated across history, in Rome, in the Inquisition, in the Soviet gulags, in modern surveillance states. Institutions may change. Technology may evolve. But the psychology of fear remains the same. This is why the story of the harem is more than history. It is a warning. Every empire knows, if you can make people police themselves, if you can make them fear each other more than they fear you, then you never have to fight open rebellion. Power sustains itself not by constant war, but by invisible chains wrapped around the human spirit. The Ottomans understood it. Every ruling elite since has copied it. And the question you must ask yourself now is, how many of those chains are still wrapped around you today? You've walked the corridors of Topkapi Palace. You've heard the muffled screams from the sacks, seen the silk cords, felt the terror that turned beauty into a curse. But now, you must face the most dangerous truth of all: the harem never truly ended. The stage has changed. The costumes have changed. But the system, the psychology of control, remains alive, hidden in plain sight around you. Ask yourself, why do modern states monitor your words, your searches, your movements? Why do corporations study your every desire, turning your private life into data they can use to shape your choices? Why is division fueled everywhere, political, racial, ideological, keeping you in constant conflict with people who should be your allies? It is the same design the Ottomans perfected: isolation, betrayal, surveillance, spectacle. A system that makes you obey, not because someone is pointing a sword at your throat, but because you doubt your neighbor, distrust your friend, fear speaking too freely. The harem was a palace of fear. The world you live in is a digital harem. Instead of silk cords, there are social punishments. Instead of drowning sacks, there is cancellation and erasure. Instead of eunuchs whispering in the dark, there are algorithms listening in silence. The methods evolve, but the aim does not: keep you compliant, keep you silent, keep you afraid. But here is what the Ottomans never intended you to understand: fear can be mastered. The same system that breaks most can forge the few who refuse to bow. Just as women like Sultan rose from slaves to rulers, you too can rise, if you recognize the prison for what it is, and refuse to let silence enslave you. This is not entertainment. This is initiation. You have been given a glimpse into a forbidden pattern, one repeated across history, now living in the shadows of your own world. And now you must decide: will you remain one of the silenced, obedient, fearful? Or will you be among the rare few who learn to weaponize the system against itself, to rise from silence into power? Write it again in the comments to seal it: from silence, I rise. Because the moment you see the pattern, you are no longer their prisoner. You are their threat. And threats are what empires fear most.